calls us to be in the sword of the Spirit. God calls us to be a worldwide community of charismatic communities who love one another, who live a way of life, and who are engaged in mission. God calls us to be ecumenical. This has been part of our call from the very beginning. We are an ecumenical community of communities throughout the world. And we believe that that call is beautiful. What can be more beautiful than unity, the unity of God's people? That call is also necessary, especially in our world today, where there is so much division, where division itself is counterproductive to our evangelization. Our unity as brothers and sisters across the churches is very much necessary. And that call is even more urgent today. 50 or so years after the Second Vatican Council of the Catholic Church affirmed the need for Christian unity, that call, that work of unity is far from over. And no less than Pope John Paul II said that the Catholic Church is irrevocably committed to the ecumenical venture. In other words, to be Catholic is to work for Christian unity. In spite of that call, in spite of the beauty and the urgency and the necessity of that call, we in the Sword of the Spirit are still far from being that ecumenical body that we believe the Lord wants us to be. Throughout the Sword of the Spirit, we are only about 3% Protestant and Orthodox. The rest is Catholic. And in the Asian region of the Sword of the Spirit, very much, almost 100% of our members are Catholic. The largest, the only ecumenical community in the Asian region is the Servants of the Lord community in Singapore. So very clearly, we need to go up higher. Each of us and various communities in the Asian region, we need to go up higher. Another way of saying this is we need to ascend the ecumenical ladder. And we have provided this very simple diagram to help us assess where each of us are in terms of our commitment to unity, our understanding and acceptance of Christian unity. And notice that the bottom step, hardly at all any unity, is a hostile attitude. So at the very bottom is the mindset that says, you are my enemy. We treat Christians from other denominations as our enemies. And we need to go up, of course. But is indifference enough? The indifferent person says, you mean nothing to me. I don't care about you. So this is also not quite acceptable. And then we move to actual acceptance of one another. We begin to regard one another as members of the same Christian family. And we say, you are my brother, you are my sister. And we can go even higher and go to respect. The one who respects the other says, what can I learn from you? And how might I listen more carefully to you and to take you even more into consideration? And then we can also go higher from respect to interdependence, where we see that on our own, we cannot do everything. In fact, we need one another. And so we ask, how can we work together? And even this is not yet the topmost steps, because we can go further up and go to deference, where we say, how can I serve you? And how can I let you go before me? So this attitude of deferring to one another, it shows a certain high regard for the other person. It shows that we relate to our Christian brothers and sisters. We don't have to agree with everything, and yet we defer to them in love. And maybe the last step, you could say the hardest step, is defending one another as brothers and sisters. And even this step is a necessary step. And here we say, how can I lay down my life for you? Notice that this final step is the step of Jesus, where he also relates to us sinners as we are, as his friends, and he came to save us, and he came to lay down his life for us. The ascent of the ecumenical ladder is nothing less than a kind of discipleship. It is a following of Jesus. And so we see that the worst case is hostility. Christians can disagree violently, even over sacred scripture. Or if not, then there is that sneering kind of regard for one another. And so it is a kind of improvement to move towards indifference. And yet, indifference means that we don't really care for each other and we don't listen to each other. We close our hearts and our minds to the other person, to the other Christian. We need to move to acceptance. And here is where friendship lies. Here is where we relate to one another as brothers and sisters in the same Christian family. Today, we know that there is a move towards highlighting the need for respecting one another, regardless of one's religion, one's race, one's background, one's education, and so on. Respect. And we need to also move towards a level of respecting the other Christian as really a fellow Christian, a fellow disciple, a fellow follower of Jesus Christ. And respecting one another means listening to one another and not rushing in to interrupt when the other person speaks. It means that we take the other person's perspective into consideration. It means that we accept that the other person has a right to his beliefs. Okay? So we need to also move from simply accepting each other in the mind as our brother and sister to respecting one another. And then we can move further to really depending on one another, working together for the mission, working for the other, with the other for the work of building up God's kingdom. We also need to defer to one another. This is the step up where we let the other person go first. This is again part of love. This is part of being a humble Christian. And like I said, we need to defend one another. Okay? When we see our fellow Christian being persecuted, we must, if we can, let's step in and try to help and to defend the reputation, defend the good name, defend the rights of our fellow Christians. At the very least, we can pray for our fellow Christians. There are so many ways that we can all grow in ascending the ecumenical ladder. None of us is quite there yet. None of us has reached the topmost level. We all need growth in climbing the ecumenical ladder. We all need to have a conversion of our mind and heart towards our Christian brother and sister. This is part of being Christian. This is part of being Catholic. This is part of being a member of the Sword of the Spirit, because God calls the Sword of the Spirit to be an ecumenical community of communities. In this time when we want to make this a strategic priority, we want to ask each of you to conduct a personal ecumenical health assessment. In other words, to examine ourselves prayerfully and to be very honest in admitting where we are and what is the next step for us in climbing the ecumenical ladder. So are we still in the level of hostility where we regard the other as an enemy? Or are we indifferent? We don't care. You mean nothing to me. Or maybe we have accepted other Christians, perhaps in our mind or intellectually, as our brothers and sisters. We can say, yes, yes, you are my brother, you are my sister. But there is still a way up to go in terms of respecting one another and being willing to learn from our fellow Christians. And are we interdependent? Can we work together in the work of mission and evangelization and building God's kingdom here on earth? Can we defer to one another and serve the other and let the other go before us? And can we also lay down our life for our brothers and sisters? And so, whether in a one-on-one with your pastoral leader or in your men's group or women's group, we ask you to answer these questions honestly. Discuss it with your pastoral leader, discuss it with your men's group and women's group. And let's take this time, this season of grace, to do a personal ecumenical health assessment.